I think Europe does become, that Poland does become more important in the world for two reasons. One is its physical location, that's obvious. The second is that in the pushback against Russia, both in military terms and in demonstration terms, showing it is a society that is becoming wealthier and more successful in economic terms, but also is spending money on its own defense.
Dzień dobry, witam Państwa w kolejnym odcinku naszego programu Świat według Polski, w którym staramy się pokazać o tym, jak światowe wydarzenia wpływają na nasze codzienne życie. Dzisiaj Państwa i moim specjalnym gościem jest Hamish McRae, brytyjski dziennikarz, brytyjski ekonomista, autor książek dotyczących przyszłości, też możemy powiedzieć futurolog. Mr. McRae, thank you very much for finding time for this interview.
Thank you.
In 1994, you wrote a book, How World Looks Like in 2020. And as you know, we are a few years after this moment. You predict, for example, that China will be the #1 economy in the world. And also you predict that Russia will swift to the full democracy. As we know, many things change in completely different way. So, can you say something more about these predictions?
I feel reasonably comfortable about most of them. If we take China, I can't remember the exact phrase that I used, but I think I said it would be well on the way to being the world's largest economy, which it is. If you do the calculations at purchasing power parity, it actually already is the world's largest economy. With Russia, I think I was wrong. Maybe I allowed my hopes to cloud my judgment, for I think it did seem through the early 2000s that it was indeed becoming a rough democracy, which is what I'd hoped. In the last 10 years, it's moved in the other direction, and we have to live with that. And I think it's very important, by the way, to separate the Russian people from this current regime. This will not be the regime that is in Russia forever. And I see no reason why it shouldn't move to becoming a rough democracy within the next 15 or 20 years. So, but part of the whole process of writing about the future is to give your own best judgment, but also to encourage people to think about it and to use their knowledge and then change their views when something comes along.
Please tell us what your prediction from the beginning of the 90s comes true in 2020. As I know, you also prediction that the rising of the internet availability in the world, as we know in 2020, like during the COVID pandemic, we are using all the time the online conversations, and internet was something very common for most of the humans. So can you say something more about this prediction which comes true? It was right in your previous book?
Well, I can give you a couple of examples. I said that I thought it was quite likely that Britain would leave the European Union. So by 2020, I think I was about 2 months out. So I thought also, and this is, I think, more interesting, that there would be some kind of populist pushback revolution in America that would mean a rejection of the ideas of the liberal elite. And you could say I could see Trumpism, and I said I thought it would happen in the second decade of the century. So I was lucky with my timing. I didn't mention the name of Trump because I didn't know enough about him. You can't see that. But I could see that there was already tension, which and hostility towards the liberal elite, and that at some stage that would burst through, which of course it has now. I think I found the hardest thing to get right was technology. I could see it be linked computers, and I could see mobile telephony would be important, but I could not see any of the detail. I could not envisage social media, for example. I certainly couldn't envisage the selfie, WhatsApp, all of that. So I think actually my big lesson is that geopolitics, you can sort of see, you won't get the detail right, but technology is really, really difficult.
If we talk about the prediction of the future, how we can see the next decades, can you give some tips, like how experts like you predict the future also in the geopolitical? I think like most of the experts, journalists and ordinary people didn't expect even in January that we are in the moment when Russia basically are with very good relationship with US and Ukraine basically lose the most important ally and world looks much more dangerous and unpredictable place than even a few weeks ago.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to pick up what's happening there. I think I'd say two things about that. The first thing is that there have been long periods in the past where the US has gone isolationist. It's wanted to turn its back on NATO, on Europe, and I think this is what we're seeing now. In an extreme form. We saw, for example, McCarthyism in the 1950s. That wasn't being isolationist, but it was regarding its own political structures as something to be challenged, particularly by attacking people who were thought to be communists then. And actually it was a challenge against the law of the land. And eventually that ebbed away. I think the second thing to say is that there has been growing resentment in the United States, slowly building over a long period, that Europe was not taking its defense seriously. And, it has now forced Europe to take its defense seriously. And I can understand that. Why should we in America have to be the police people of the world? Even when people don't like us very much, they don't respect us, they sneer at us, why should we defend them? So if you say, well, yes, but there's been a complete flip of American policy, I think I'd say we don't yet know how this will play out. We should not assume that the US and Russia will be warm buddies in 6 months' time. We can see how, if the war could be stopped on anything like the sort of the physical lines that there are now, the battle lines of Ukraine now, maybe that is the least bad solution for Ukraine, and we should not assume that the way in which American policy has flipped means that it has flipped completely and that it cannot be a useful ally to Europe, having achieved one of its really big aims of making Europe take its own defense seriously.
Of course, everyone in Poland, but also in the different countries, most of the people ask the questions, what will going to happen with Ukraine, with Russia, aggressive policy? What is your prediction if you talk about the next months, next years? Do you think that Russia could invade NATO states like Baltic, like Estonia, Lithuania, even Poland? Or maybe completely different scenario you see if we talk about the geopolitical of Europe?
Well, it's a tough question. Point one, we have learned, and Russia has learned, that its military is not very good. For it to be rebuffed and fought back in the way it was by Ukraine has shown that the Russian military forces are not probably nearly as capable as we might have feared that they were. There is therefore no immediate threat to Eastern Europe. Now, look forward 3 years, 5 years, and there may be. I'm not sure about that. Point two, Europe is at last taking its own defense seriously. Poland, really important in this. The Balts, the Baltic states too, bringing Finland and Sweden into NATO, extremely important. And maybe even pushing Germany into taking its own defense much more seriously too. There are gaps. Italy, Spain, not that serious. France is difficult. Here in Britain, we look at the way in which it does not want to include British armament manufacturers in the new European policy unless French fishermen have more access to our waters. Wait, I mean, what is this? This is not serious. So I think that it will be messy, but I think that America has achieved one really important policy objective, which is to make Europe take its own defense seriously. And I think that's very, very, very welcome.
So do you think that Trump is not crazy? He has some kind of master plan? What is the end game of the Trump policy? If you talk about the foreign relation, also transatlantic relation?
I don't think he's crazy at all. I think people misread him. They see the television performer. They see the extraordinary and sometimes quite disgraceful things that he says. They don't look at the way in which he is reflecting a large portion of American opinion. He won the popular vote, but by a large margin, but he has control of the house of both houses. So I think that he represents what a lot of people in America would like to see happen. I think I, like most Europeans, feel uncomfortable about the way in which he expresses that. But I respect the thought behind it. And I think we in Europe should all respect the ideas behind it, and take ourselves a bit more seriously. Is there a master plan? I don't know. I don't think there is a master plan, except insofar as America sees the principal rival for global power being China, not Russia. So Russia needs to be contained. The real rival is China.
What is really interesting, 3 years ago, you published a book, How World Maybe Looks Like in 2050. So what is your main prediction if you talk about the geopolitics policy? What is your main prediction about the world in the next 25 years? If you talk about Russia, US, China, can you say something more about it? Also about the Europe, of course.
Well, let's start with Russia. I think I said earlier that this regime will not be there forever, and that the Russian people should be respected. Huge culture, wonderful people in many, many ways. And I mean, I should acknowledge that for many years I worked for the independent newspaper. I still write a column in one of the papers we created, The Eye, and that was actually rescued by Russian money, the Lebedevs. So, lots of contributions to the West. I think that, however, Russia will be, and was always going to be, a very difficult country to deal with. And I'm not sure we have dealt with it well. And I hope now we need a line into what people around about the current leadership are thinking. We must make clear our own red lines. We can't have Russians coming and trying to murder people on our territory. We must have our own red lines. But I think we just need to respect it and go on dealing with it, showing the things that where we can keep a line of communication open and where we absolutely have to say, this will not happen, we cannot do this. I think that will be respected. I think in a funny way, Europe may be more respected by Russia now. It is starting to rearm than it was when it was relying on the American umbrella. Where should we go next? Who next should we talk about?
Yes, I also want to add the additional question about the Russian society, because many experts, also Polish, Ukrainians, say that the Russian society basically are based on the death cult. If we look to the history, like most of the Russian history is about authoritarianism, very hard power, if you talk about the government. But you say that this society could go to the democracy, full democracy, as I understand. So,
well, I think so.
How it could be happening?
Look, you've got to look at the problems of Russia. It has a declining population. It has very low birth rates. I think lower than much of Western Europe. Certainly, I think lower than Eastern, same sort of level as Eastern Europe. It has this huge landmass. It has this enormous giant on the far side with a long border of China. So running that country with a population that size is going to be really, really difficult. And if it then has to try and, if it cannot have a decent relationship with the West, if it doesn't have access to Western technology, it makes its task much, much harder. And so I think that we should not regard, and many clever Russians see that, and there will be great opposition to Putin and people round about him, that at some stage will burst through. Now, I'm not predicting another Russian revolution. What I'm saying is that Russian public society, its political model, will have to adapt to the reality that it has a weak economy, it is short of people, it is short of clever people, and if it doesn't have access to Western technology, it's in big, big trouble. And I think it will adapt.
If we talk about Europe, do you think that European Union will survive this, let's say, some kind of turbulence now? Also about the NATO. What is the future for Europe, do you see, if you talk about this next 25 years?
I think the European Union will continue in name, but I think it'll probably become a looser union. And if you say, can I see the mechanism? No, I can't. But I don't think we should assume the euro is there forever, unless there's much greater political coordination. I think the stresses there will come and start to show through fairly soon. It nearly died. It was held together. That doesn't mean it'll be held together forever. So I think a looser union. I think Europe it'll continue to be comfortable. There are a lot of clever people in Europe, a lot of wonderful technology. The lifestyles of Europe are much admired around the world. I think that it will continue in some form, but we should not assume that the present form of Europe politically will be there forever. But if you say to me, look, what will it be in terms of its economic power relative to that of the United States or to China, the answer, or even to India, it will be number 4. Certainly by the end of this century. It won't be number 2 or number 1. It's already number 3. Smaller economy than China, much smaller than the US and losing ground, it'll probably be passed by India as well. So, I think Europe will be comfortable, but less important.
Of course, I need to ask a question about Poland. If you talk about Europe, what is your main prediction? Do you think, because some of the experts, some of the futurologists say that the meaning of Poland or place of Poland in Europe will growing. We will be more important player in this geopolitical chessboard. But maybe you have different opinion. What do you think about the future of Poland? Of course, Poland, who still in Europe, right, is an important member of the European Union and NATO ally.
I think Europe does become, Poland does become more important in the world for two reasons. One is its physical location, that's obvious. The second is that in the pushback against Russia, both in military terms and in demonstration terms, showing it is a society that is becoming wealthier and more successful in economic terms, but also is spending money on its own defense. I think it is a bit of a beacon to Europe. It is an example to Europe how you can be a successful economy, but take your own defense much more seriously. I think we're very conscious here in Britain, not only because we have a lot of Polish people here, not only because Polish pilots were enormously important in the Battle of Britain in 1940. Not only because of that, but I think we have a respect here for Poland and an awareness of its importance, which is perhaps greater than that of some other European countries.
If we talk about the United States and China, do you think that in the next 25 years, is it possible some kind of direct confrontation between these two big world empires? Or maybe it will be a completely different scenario if we talk about this Chinese-American relations, which also are many Poles also worry about this possible confrontation. Now we see economically, but of course, we're afraid of some kind of military conflict between the US and China.
Yes, there's one specific issue and then a much more important general one. The specific issue is Taiwan. What happens there? If I do not believe China will invade Taiwan, but of course it's a possibility. I think the balance of probability is strongly against. It doesn't play on the risk-reward ratio. But I do believe in one way or another, Taiwan will be incorporated into Greater China. I think the balance of probability is that will happen in some form. And if you say, okay, what form? I don't know. I think behind that, and the more general issue, is what happens to the Chinese economy. When I wrote that book, signed it off 3 years ago, I thought the balance of probability was very much that China would become the world's largest economy at market exchange rates, not just at purchasing power parity rates. I'm not so sure now. Three things have happened. One, and the most important, is that it looks as though the Chinese population is turning down much more quickly than we thought, even 3 or 4 years ago. Birth rates are lower, and that will have a profound impact on China's growth prospects through the next 25, 30 years. Secondly, there's pushback from America. That's really, really strong. Third, we have Xi's regime, which is making it harder for China to be so comfortably incorporated in the world economy. So it's not just pushback against America, it's other countries saying, look, wait a minute, should we be so reliant on China for these technologies? should we be so reliant on China as a supplier of goods and services and so on? So I think that for those three reasons, China will fade. And one final issue here: how will this happen? What will happen in China in the next 10 to 15 years? And I think, and this is an intellectual bet that I'm making, I think there will be some kind of discontinuity. It will stop looking outward aggressively to the world, wanting to conquer the world in economic terms. And it will look much more inward to itself, trying to give a better life for its very rapidly aging population. Will that happen within the Communist Party? Will there be some deposing of the Communist Party? Look, I don't know. I don't think we can call that. But I do think there will be a big shift of attitude within China, probably in the 2030s.
So people who born in this year, some sociologists say this is part of the beta generation. In 2050, we'll have the 25 years. So how world will looks like in this moment for them? World will looks like completely different in your opinion, or maybe pretty the same, but with the different geopolitical or maybe technological economy parts?
I think in big geopolitics, we can very broadly see it. The US, I think, being still almost certainly the world's largest economy, China the second largest, but a calmer China, Europe being comfortable and calm, but not mattering very much. Big issues like what happens to Africa, I don't know. But I think that we can sketch broad outlines there. The hardest thing I find is, and this is enormously important for someone who's going to be starting in the job market in 2050, in their early 20s or middle 20s, whatever, will be what happens to technology. And the big question there is, will we find a way of improving the efficiency of service industries to a radical extent in the same way as we have improved and increased the efficiency of manufacturing? And you know, manufacturing is brilliant. The products we can buy are extraordinary. The motor cars are more reliable, they're calmer, they're safer, they're better than they were even 25 years ago. Telecommunications are divine. It's magical that we can have this conversation in the way we can now. But not just us having it. I can talk to my grandchildren in America in the same way for free. So that's astounding. And there have, however, been dark sides. What's happened to mental health of young people because of social media, all that. But that is an extraordinary change in 25 years. Remember, 25 years ago, the iPhone did not exist. There were no apps. It was utter transformation. So I think the really big question is, how will technology change? And we're just catching a glimpse now of AI and its potential. And if AI can be used wisely, then my hope is it will enable us to get the same sort of increases in productivity in service industries that we have achieved in manufacturing. And if that can happen, much more efficient government, much more efficient medical care, education that is better and cheaper, all those things, then we can actually radically increase the living standards of that next generation of young people. So they will be able, when they hit the job market, not only to have jobs, but good jobs, but also have a reasonable expectation that they will be richer than their parents. And I think maintaining the health of society for that is just enormously important. Saying to your children they're not going to be as rich as we are is a pretty dismal outlook. And I think and hope that the technologies will come along, and we're just seeing AI in its infancy, which will enable us to be confident of that.
At the end, I want to ask a question about the physical money, about the banknotes, coins, and so on. Do you think in 2050 we will pay only by the electronic money, like cryptocurrency, some stuff, or still this hard money will run the world and everyone will have in the pockets like banknotes, coins, and so on? Because maybe do you hear the same voices in Great Britain, but in Poland, many people afraid that the physical money will disappear, and of course everyone will control what we do with our money, with our fees, and so on. What do you think about it?
I worry, of course, that physical money will disappear. I worry a great deal about cryptocurrencies. They're not really currencies at all. They're something where there's nothing there. And as an economist, if you're looking at what is the function of money, you're saying it is to collect savings that go into investment, that build houses, that build hospitals, that actually have some end use which is useful to society. And cryptocurrency, what is that? What is there? And the answer is there is nothing that improves the human condition as a result. So it's just money being stuffed away and performing no function at all. I think one has to distinguish between methods of payment and asset forms. I think methods of payment, if that is just done over a phone, that's fine, as long as you can still have some measure of a currency which is issued by national or international authorities where there is something behind it. Ultimately, what is behind the dollar? It is the American economy. If you have a dollar, then you can actually go and buy something from America, be it oil, a product, American car even, if they improve them a bit. You can buy a product that money is something valuable. Same for the euro, same for the Japanese yen, probably the same for. So I think you have to say, will currencies remain that you can see how the method of payment is, whether it's done electronically or with physical money? I don't mind so much. But what worries me is that we will become so. Two things worry me. One is that we're investing in nonsense currencies like Bitcoin that will actually become worthless. And if they don't become worthless, then people want to have it. But sooner or later, people will say, well, actually, I want to buy something real with this, not just stack it away. And I think that, therefore, I think Bitcoin, and here is a prediction, I think Bitcoin will collapse. I think there'll be a cryptocurrency collapse at some stage. But whether the actual payment is by a credit card or by a note, I don't think that matters very much. As long as there are notes somewhere in the background that you can always, and I think all of us have had this experience, you go to a restaurant, there's a blackout, the systems are down, how do you pay for your meal? Well, actually, if you've got some money and a few notes in your bank, they'll always accept it.
Thank you very much for this very interesting, very in-deep interview. Państwa i moim gościem był Hamish McRae, brytyjski dziennikarz, ekonomista, autor książek na temat przyszłości. Mr. McRae, thank you very much for finding time for this interview.
It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.